Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Monday again. Here we are, Monday, June 26th, 2023. Time for another show and time for me to set the alarms for all of our breaks. And for some reason that isn't set yet today. Okay, ready to roll? I feel ready. Greg Dworkin already preparing his raft. Oh, stories, of course. I guess by Saturday, I thought that we would have an extraordinarily exciting show today. History in the making, that we would be reporting on whatever developments we were able to glean from Frontline or elsewhere reportage of a Russian civil war of sorts, and maybe there is one and maybe there isn't. I mean, maybe there's a Russia and maybe there isn't. There may have been one last week. We don't know. We've never been entirely sure of what to make of what Russia is these days. But it looked like they were plunging into outright civil war on Friday/Saturday, but by Sunday things have cleared up a little bit, and so everything should be okay. And so the war's over, and it's not happening, or I don't know. We got to figure out what happened here. The only thing I was able to say, well, two things I was able to conclude. One, that you shouldn't even try to guess who you think you want to be the winner in that particular civil war. And who knows, maybe some other force would arise and take control, and it would be spectacular and wonderful. But there was nothing great as between the choices between Putin and Prigozhin. Nobody likes Putin much, but I don't know what you were going to get with Prigozhin, and it's not a great deal always to say, well, this guy is a real jerk. Let's have a private mercenary dictator take over. Well, maybe not such a great idea. That did not stop Republicans, though, by the way, from spending the weekend insisting that whatever, quote-unquote, the left is, they were, in fact, rooting for Prigozhin in some way. Because, of course, every Republican accusation is a confession, and they are actively pro-Putin, so they had to believe that the left, which, you know, is their opposition somehow, and they totally hate, even if they can't describe them properly or think they're all communists or it's actually Antifa disguised as somebody else. I don't know. But the left was supporting Prigozhin. And one, nobody had any time to support anybody. There was no time to support anybody, even if you wanted to. And two, nobody's supporting anybody in anything. You don't even, it's hard to even define people saying, well, I guess I hope Prigozhin wins. 'Cause everybody knew what the stakes were as between these two, and nobody was interested in one or the other winning who didn't already have a side. People who weren't already pro-Putin didn't become pro-Putin or adopt the stance of being pro-Prigozhin or anything, and I saw no one doing that. But I did see J.D. Vance insisting that the left was doing that. Anyway, by Sunday, the whole thing seems to have been diffused anyway, and we didn't even really get a chance to talk about what was going on. I just thought the other observation I made was, well, at least the Russians are having their civil war before the one they were trying so hard to make us have. So maybe that's a good thing, or else maybe we're in already the protracted beginnings of that. Who knows? History will have to decide that later on. Right now, it seems okay. You can go out to the stores. Still 31 flavors over at Baskin-Robbins. Don't know why they limited themselves to that. That must have been a huge number of flavors back in the day. Now, of course, it's ridiculous. You can't even, you would be, they would look at you funny if you had 31 flavors in a street corner, or your little bike pedal powered scoop machine here, whatever it is. 31 would be nothing. But anyway, I don't know. That used to be the standard. But yeah, all the stores are open. We're fine. It doesn't appear to be civil war. That's that. Let's see. Also, a lot of activity over the weekend, which is a good thing, reminding people, various attempts at reminding people that COVID isn't over, including lots of articles about how, hey, all you people who say COVID is over, COVID isn't over. Okay, I understood that to be the case, of course. So did you. But it is an interesting sort of approach to the reporting. I mean, it's a great call to do a story on it, that people are walking around saying COVID is over, meaning I'm going to stop taking precautions about COVID, and then they get COVID, and then they, well, in some cases, complain on social media when, it's okay. It's all right. You're not feeling well. It's perfectly fine for you to grouse about things. It sucks to get sick, and it sucks to have COVID. But lots of, I don't know, there's anecdotal evidence there, just like that there's a civil war, that the left is rooting for somebody in Prigozhin's case or whatever. But lots of anecdotal evidence of people saying, I just finally got used to saying, all right, well, nobody around me is masking anymore. There's this enormous pressure to stop masking. Or I forgot my mask, and instead of turning around and not going into the store, I went into the store, et cetera, et cetera. I'm getting looser with the mask, too, but I still do have it, and I still take it with me. And I still wear it pretty regularly when I go indoors places. Occasionally, if I have forgotten it, I will just say, I got to do the damn errand anyway. But then they get COVID after 3 years of avoiding it. So there's still people out there who haven't gotten it and who are then getting it and then getting upset with themselves. And that's how I did it too. I mean, I said, everybody was going to a big party and everybody had long since stopped not going to big parties. Why don't I go ahead and do this thing? And sure enough, that was it. That's how you got it. And anyway, as I guess people who say they've been super cautious and haven't gotten COVID in the first 3 years begin to get it, we're also beginning to get stories, of course, of people who are saying, I also got my second case of COVID, and it's still out there. Thankfully, it's not nearly as virulent. Most people have been vaccinated. Certainly the people who've been careful for 3 years have been vaccinated and boosted. I got to get back on the booster schedule. As I recall, reading and not really registering the information because I was sick. But at the time when I had COVID, I go, well, do I have to wait how long do I have to wait until I can get a booster? And I think the information I recall coming away with was 6 months after infection, you can go and get another booster. And now they're toying with the booster again and bringing it more up to date. So once they get all of the newest formulation online, maybe it's time for me to go and do that. I think I got it in like late January. So it's about that time. And sorry for all the people who are experiencing COVID for the first time, second time, 15th time, I guess, if you're that unlucky. But yes, also more information, of course, about long-term effects, et cetera, et cetera. I did see somebody, I forgot to put this one aside, but I meant to read it, not necessarily on the air, but probably in off hours. But somebody saying, kids and their math scores, the math scores continue to plummet even 2 years after the kids have returned to school. So either maybe it wasn't necessarily all about being in person in school, or maybe it's just irrecoverable what people lost while they were away from school. Or this theory was, maybe COVID actually, one, affects children, and two, maybe it does have long-term brain effects after all, and you ought to be looking at that alongside the mystery of how it is that 2+ years after kids return to in-person instruction, they're still not doing well in math. But then again, there's probably kids who are doing great in math. So I don't know. And the science will have to get to work on it. So here's Greg to work on the science of it, or perhaps to tell us about the revolution that may or may not be going on, civil war that might not be going on. But we got to talk about Russia at least a little bit. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
We sort of do.
Okay. I mean it's a big country and all.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. Right. As far as COVID goes, if you haven't had your vaccine, now's a good time to get it.
Sure.
If you're not sure whether you're eligible, you can log into one of those websites like CVS and plug in your information, and they'll tell you whether or not you're eligible.
Yeah. I mean, you might guess they would say, yeah, you're eligible. Come and pay us for a vaccine.
They're pretty good about saying, no, it's too soon, or
okay,
whatever.
They've been paid plenty, so I suppose they don't have to worry about it that much. And
they can also offer you the
sick.
vaccine, but you don't have to use them for that. You can just find out whether you're eligible.
That's true. Right. So it's free, and you should go ahead and try it, and I guess I will do it. Instead of listening to this, I'm going to go check. All right.
Anyway.
Yes.
What's been interesting about the Russia situation
Yeah, Russians are
He's
involved.
watching the people who are experts on COVID become experts on submarines who are now experts on Russia.
Yes.
So they have a lot to say. And, there's experts on other stuff. I actually am going to bring up later in the show some procedural issues about impeachment. And sometimes I turn to procedural issues because when you don't really know what's going on, rather than just spin your wheels and just let out a bunch of hot air, let's talk about something interesting.
Yeah.
That maybe has no answers, but is still interesting. But we'll get to that later.
Okay. I don't know anything about Russia.
With Russia, my headline for the pundit roundup was the way I saw it. Mercs just want to be paid. Apologies to Cyndi Lauper. And maybe the whole issue is just like he didn't get his check in the mail and he got pissed off.
That may be. I mean, if that's supposed to be one of the benefits of being an oligarch, is it makes you fabulously wealthy. And if the money doesn't start flowing, well, that's very mob-ocratic of them, right? It's only
that's
just
it.
business.
This is the Godfather. This is sometimes there's war and sometimes there's peace. And sometimes you get together and the families decide to have peace for a while, and then somebody breaks the peace.
Yeah, and it's issues of getting paid, which usually trigger this stuff.
Yeah, and those
just
are the
business.
rules, and that's how it works.
Okay.
So, maybe it's as simple as that. Now, supposedly, Igor Prigozhin, who decided to do a march on Moscow and then changed his mind and supposedly is now in Belarus because the Belarusian president brokered a deal.
I thought the Belarusian president recently left his country.
Well, nobody really knows what's going on. So nobody knows where Prigozhin is. Nobody knows where Putin is. Nobody knows what's really going on.
They have windows
People
in
think
Belarus.
for the most part that Putin's probably weakened, but what does that mean? Does that make him more dangerous?
Right.
And nobody knows. And that's why there's a lot of wheel spinning on this.
Prigozhin doesn't look happy in the picture you chose.
Well, he's the life of the party.
That
he's
looks
just
like
a
a
fun
Russian
guy,
party.
right?
It does. Okay.
And maybe he just wanted to be paid. So here's what Yaroslav Trofimov says in the Wall Street Journal. After a weekend of chaos in Russia, questions remain over fate of Wagner. And that's the thing. Wagner was an effective fighting force.
Yes. They were the best.
And because they were an effective fighting force and they've been taken off the field in Ukraine, it's got to help the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
And it was
Syrians.
interesting as to why they were so effective at fighting force. I got a thread on that in a minute. Other pundit responses, Washington Post, as revolt in Russia subsides, U.S. and allies brace for what comes next.
Bracey. That's me.
So it was interesting. And then what does it mean? And nobody knows. The Economist, how the mutiny in Russia will shape the battlefield in Ukraine. Yevgeny Prigozhin is retreating, but his mutiny undermines the Kremlin's war. One of the things that happened is he took over Rostov-on-the-Hudson. No, it's Rostov-on-Don, I think.
Yeah.
And, that is a hub for supplying Ukraine. So that's been disrupted. And when you step back and look at the big picture, part of the issue here is
take a break. Go ahead. Bless you.
who can Putin trust?
Nobody.
Putin can't trust anybody.
Of course not. That's why he's been sitting 30 feet away from everybody.
Right. One of the better cartoons over the weekend is Putin talking with some general with a bunch of medals at this super long table, thinking to himself, I need a longer table.
Yeah, right.
I need a bigger boat.
Well, once everybody realizes the only thing that really is keeping this together is everybody's afraid of him killing them, but I could kill everybody just as easily. You start to wonder whether maybe I could be the president of Russia.
So Nicholas Grossman says, why do people pay more attention to developments in the biggest war in decades or to novel stories with an element of suspense than to the 73rd attempt to manufacture a scandal out of the president's not-in-government son? That's so weird.
Yeah, well, you would think people would pay more attention to the other thing, but there's only a narrow slice of people who care about the other thing.
Well, as Grossman says, that question actually answers itself. It's the opposite that's weird.
Oh.
And so it's Republicans who are weird, and they are. And, as you pointed out with J.D. Vance, who just says things for the sake of saying things, but he's in Ohio, so, he's got impunity for 6 years. It's hard to know why they do what they do. Just assume that they're a bunch of fascists and they're upset that Putin's regime was challenged.
Yeah, I mean,
and they don't know what to say about it. So let's talk about this. There were all these pieces over the weekend and Twitter stuff about, Biden manufactured the submarine crisis because Hunter Biden, and also he manufactured with the CIA the Russia crisis because Hunter Biden. They just wanted to distract from Hunter Biden. So you have to, put yourself in that mindset and say that they're just like totally whacked out and have no grip on reality whatsoever.
Well, the
which is why they're
manufacturing
going to
sector
lose the
is
next
back.
election. We'll get to that too. But
okay.
That's another story.
I thought they were for American manufacturing, but apparently not.
Well, they're manufacturing rumors.
That's the business we're in these days.
But which, unfortunately, is really Russian troll farms. And by the way, they are under the control of Igor Prigozhin. So it's really hard to tell, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. In Russia, assume everybody's the bad guy.
Yeah, Yakov Smirnov did.
Yeah. Or, go back to Fiddler on the Roof.
Yeah.
Right? Whatever it is, it's bad for the Jews.
Pretty much. It's never a great place hanging out in Russia. But if you're upset about
May God
losing
bless
your
the Tsar and keep him far away from us.
if you're concerned about losing your alliance with Putin, Prigozhin will be a terrific autocrat to team up with and ruin America with. He'll help you. Don't worry about it, Republicans. Don't be sad.
Right. So there's two specific things I want to talk about here. This is Phillips O'Brien, who's a military analyst, who's been pretty much right about the Ukraine war all along.
Yes, that's what we think.
And therefore somebody worth listening to. The Prigozhin coup seems pretty damn well organized, and he was writing this as it was going on.
Okay.
It's all right. We're about 12 hours into what's clearly an attempt by Yevgeny Prigozhin
yes,
to topple the leadership of the Russian military and very possibly the Russian government. This all started with an announcement by Prigozhin yesterday that the Russian army had launched a missile attack on a Wagner base. And
yes, that's what he thought started it. I don't know. We don't know.
At first, this attempt by Prigozhin seemed almost impulsive and bound to fail. But what does seem to be the case now is that this is a well-planned operation that's been a while in the making and has a greater chance of success, and certainly I would have thought yesterday.
Yeah.
The timing, the placement of Russian forces, the areas that Prigozhin seized, and the fact that Putin was clearly caught off guard. You can see this.
Yeah.
So, if you don't mind, I thought I would talk a little bit about, he writes, about why I think it's well organized.
Okay. I did see a lot of people saying that, I think they were patting themselves on the back, but saying, I've been saying that this was going to happen. So maybe it's just BS.
Yeah,
let's
and
hear
we
what
picked
Phillips
a Friday
says.
night because all the Russian troops were drunk.
All right. Well, Phillips O'Brien, you're right. He's been pretty good on this. Let's hear his.
So, timing. It's a perfect time for Prigozhin to take the risk. Almost all of Wagner's pulled out of Ukraine over the last month and was back in Russia itself.
Oh.
This means that he's got a ready supply of rested forces, some with combat experience. I've seen regular estimates of 20 to 30,000 Wagner personnel who are now under his authority, and they seem to be pretty well equipped.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there was one analyst who said, all those complaints about his not getting weapons and ammunition, he was getting them. He was just stockpiling them for this.
Oh, that's true. I guess if you were thinking about that, you keep saying, where's my weapons? And
I need more.
Where's my
I need
weapons?
more. I'm putting them aside for just in case I need it.
Okay.
I mean, they've already shot down at least one Russian army helicopter. That did happen, by the way. One aircraft.
Oh.
That doesn't happen by accident. If his forces have been rested and re-equipped, Russian regular forces are in the exact opposite position. They're engaged 80 to 90% in Ukraine itself.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been engaged in combat for weeks to months without a break, so the timing seems to be no accident, as he's chosen a moment of maximum opportunity. And as Russian forces are overwhelmingly in Ukraine and engaged trying to stop the Ukrainian counteroffensive, they're in a terrible position to stop Prigozhin.
Yeah.
The fighting in Ukraine has been growing in intensity for weeks now, and there are regular signs that Russia's already deploying its reserves to try to hold the Ukrainians back. With Russian forces so fully committed, Putin and the army has a terrible dilemma. Do they take some of their troops out of Ukraine to try and stop Wagner? That's precisely what Ukraine would like them to do. The Russians would have to weaken their line while the Ukrainians still have the vast majority of their offensive troops prepared. And Russian forces in Ukraine have not shown the ability to move quickly in and out of theater. So the army would have to pull them out of the line, put them on trucks and trains. Good luck finding them. and redeploy them into Russia and send them into action against Wagner. And if they do something like that, the chance of organizational chaos is very high.
Yeah.
So Russian command and control has not been a strength for them.
Right. They've had their difficulties.
So one option
I think
is a chaotic redeployment of Russian forces from Ukraine, which will weaken the line against the Ukrainians and still take time to confront Wagner. And if Putin doesn't move Russian forces from Ukraine, he'll have to use air power or rely on internal security forces. And we'll come back to that later in regard to internal security forces. Or even thrown together army units. And if Wagner actually has 20 or 30,000 troops, that's going to be, a fight Wagner would win. So we've seen from the Ukrainian-sponsored incursions over the border into Russia just how weakly this area is defended. It might be that internally the force just isn't there.
He wishes the force was with him.
Now, that corresponds with lots of reports saying that when Wagner did roll into Rostov-on-Hudson, there was no opposition.
Okay.
People just didn't care one way or the other. It's not like they came out and cheated the troops. They just sat there smoking a cigarette in flip-flops, watching the fighters go back and forth.
Yeah, I don't know what I would think if I were living there. I'd be like, I don't know, armies roll through here all the time. They speak Russian. They are Russian. I don't know. I don't understand what's going on here. Are these guys Russian troops that they ran out of uniforms for, or are they Wagner? Do they have signs? What? How do you know? So
now another point he makes
is
one thing that seems apparent is that Wagner knew exactly what to seize first.
Yes, Rostov, apparently.
The supply hubs of the Russian army into Ukraine. The first city was Rostov. Amazingly, Putin admitted the city had been captured, and it also seems likely that Voronezh, which has been seized as well, they're on the main rail supply hubs to get military equipment into Ukraine for the Russian army.
Okay.
So if the Russian army doesn't control them even now, because nobody knows, that means Russian troops in Ukraine are not being resupplied.
Well, that would be no surprise. I'm sure they keep saying.
And so Phillips O'Brien, of course, that's as Biden would say, a BFD.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, just as an aside, by the way.
Yes. No.
It's not Biden's age right now, given this Russia thing. It's his experience. Having somebody who's been around and doesn't jump the gun is extraordinarily comforting.
Yes. I mean,
especially when you consider
as much
the
as
alternative.
it could be. Right.
And don't think that won't come up in the election.
Right. True.
I know he's old, but look what he does when he's pushed.
Yes. And that was so I guess the Republicans retooled their complaints and then said he's not doing anything. And it was really
exactly.
We're watching
Sleepy
to see
Joe.
what the hell's going on here.
Right.
Why isn't he saying something? And there was a statement from some sources, I don't know if it was White House sources, but administration sources saying this is one of those situations where you don't say anything lest your comments be used to make the situation worse. What are you going to say? Cut that out to people? They're not going to listen to us. So
now cut that out.
Yeah, it's not likely to work. But that wouldn't stop, the weirdos in the Republican Party from saying, "Oh, we have things to say about it." They, like you said, they put down their submarine expertise hat and then pretend to be international relations people.
So Phillips O'Brien, the military guy, says, "Look, I know I bang on a lot about logistics, but this is a huge deal. The Russian army's existence in Ukraine is now entirely dependent on what happens in two cities controlled by Prigozhin. This gives him enormous leverage. He doesn't have to shut off the supplies. He has to threaten to. And it adds enormous instability to Putin's decision-making. And that may play into why Prigozhin was able to, on paper, cut a good deal for himself, meaning he lives another day, even though, he shouldn't be having tea with anybody, and especially not in front of an open window.
Right. Stay away from there. Low buildings, mostly in Belarus.
Right. So those are all important.
I don't know.
Now, here's the interesting part. Igor Shushko,
that guy again,
quotes a Russian human rights activist operating from Paris named Oshenskin.
In Paris. He's a Russian
Well,
human
you've got
rights
to flee
activist.
Russia. It's like, that's your thing.
Otherwise your quote is, help, let me out.
Otherwise your quote is, have some tea and here's a window. So Oshenskin's sources say, reported by Igor Sushko, Prigozhin's coup planning took 8 months. Incredible rapid success in just 24 hours, explained by GRU, that's the Russian military intelligence, the internal forces I mentioned.
Yes, okay.
Their 2nd and 15th brigades under Utkin and Wagner's former Russian Spetsnaz mercenaries, those are the specialists,
okay,
are spearheading the operation. The GRU Spetsnaz are the best trained special ops in the Russian military. They're specifically trained on capture of border posts, military bases, comm centers, and strategic weapons.
Oh.
And the number of Russian military units who are specially trained, who are special ops, who are good at what they do, in other words, who switch sides to Prigozhin is significant. A list of Russian military units that fully or partially have switched to Prigozhin's side based on Oshenskin's sources include Wagner PMC, members of the Wind of Change group, Inside FSB, which is the KGB equivalent. Sources include intercepted communications and internal reports.
Okay.
So GRU is military.
All right.
FSB is Federal Security Service, formerly KGB.
Yes, all right. Got it.
And he specifically names specific units who have gone over to Prigozhin. So not only was there no pushback, I mean, he didn't find any opposition. But some of the key units who know what they're doing and are specially trained to quickly take over places switched over to Wagner. And that's how he got as far as he did.
Well, that'll
Now, nobody knows why it stopped and what the rest is, but clearly holding those towns, in effect hostage, gave Prigozhin quite a bit of leverage. And we'll have to end it here because nobody else knows what happened after that.
That's true. We have no more info. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support.
She was there. She was in Rostov-on-Hudson for some reason.
Okay. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the show where we found some more information. We thought we were out of information, so we left, and now we're back, and I found something. Greg found something, and I watched him find it.
So Ann Applebaum is writing in The Atlantic, basically making the point that in order to keep himself in power, one of the tricks that oligarchs and strongmen use is to get people uninterested in politics.
Who cares?
And it doesn't matter. Who cares? I might as well be in charge as long as I make life okay for you because, don't get involved.
Okay.
Don't do these activist movements. Just it doesn't make any difference.
Like you were saying, just sit back and watch.
Sit back and watch. And she says Putin's caught in his own trap. After spending years in cultivating public apathy, the Russian president found his people indifferent to his fate.
I got it now. Okay. Now I get the trap. No one cares if he's deposed. Well, he does, but I mean...
Right, so Yevgeny Prigozhin,
right,
Wagner's violent ex-con leader, the guy who's so much fun at parties, posted videos of himself chatting with the local commanders.
Hello, local commander. How are you? In a cave or just regular?
Now in the courtyard of the headquarters of Russia's Southern Military District. Nobody seemed to mind. Outside Rostov-on-Hudson, outside street sweepers continued their work. Early in the morning, a few people came to Gluck, but not many. After Putin gave a panicked speech on TV comparing the situation in 1917 and evoking the ghost of civil war, one man pushing a bicycle was filmed berating the Wagnerites and telling them to go home. Troops laughed at him. But later in the day, more people showed up, and it was just festive.
No berating?
People shook their hands, brought them food, took selfies. Apples, chips. Everything there in the store has been bought to give to the soldiers, one woman said. In the evening, after Prigozhin decided to stand down, wherever home turns out to be, he drove away in an SUV with crowds filming him on their cell phones and cheering him on. This was the most remarkable aspect of the whole day. Nobody seemed to mind, particularly, that a brutal new warlord had arrived to replace the existing regime. Not the security services, not the army, not the general public. Nobody cared. On the contrary, many seemed sorry for him to go. Right? The response is hard to understand without reckoning the power of apathy, a much undervalued political tool. Democratic politicians spend a lot of time thinking about how to engage people and persuade them to vote. But a certain kind of autocrat, of whom Putin is the outstanding example, seeks to convince people the opposite. Don't participate. Don't care. Don't mail in your votes. Don't vote early.
It's
Republican Party in the United States.
Right.
Don't vote. Not to follow politics at all. Just, do what I do because we're right. The propaganda used in Putin's Russia has been designed in part for this purpose. The constant provision of absurd, conflicting explanations and lies, the famous fire hose of falsehoods, encourages many people to believe there's no truth. And so there's widespread cynicism. And if you don't know what's true, then there isn't anything you can do about it. Protest is pointless. Engagement is useless. And basically, Putin set that up, and people said, yeah, well, that applies to you too. Like, who cares? Bye.
I guess. I mean, maybe if you don't, you're not enjoying any particular freedoms, you won't miss them when the next autocrat comes along. So you just, you do what you got to do to make sure that they don't shoot you while you're walking by. If that's
right,
giving them potato chips,
that we're loyal to you. Chips. We're just loyal to leave us alone.
Yeah.
May God bless the Tsar and keep him far away from us.
That's all there is to it. Okay.
Yeah, been true for years. So, turning to the U.S., new polling out. Worth going over. But Connor Sen made a point, and I thought I would use this reference to just bring it up. Misery Index.
Oh.
Do you remember the Misery Index from the Carter years?
Yes, barely.
A definition. The Misery Index is a measure of economic distress felt by everyday people due to the risk of or actual joblessness combined with an increasing cost of living. The Misery Index is calculated by adding the seasonally adjusted unemployment rate to the inflation rate.
Okay.
Since both unemployment and inflation are considered detrimental to one's health and economic well-being, their combined value is useful as an indicator of overall economic health. Now, this was popularized in the 70s with the development of stagflation, or simultaneously high inflation and unemployment. The first Misery Index was created by Arthur Okun to provide a snapshot of the U.S. economy. Yeah, and sometimes it includes other things like bank lending rates. It's an imprecise metric, but it just gives you an idea of what's going on.
If you call it the Misery Index, there's never going to be a good number.
Right. So, Connor Sen says, look, here are Misery Index scores in June of presidential re-election years.
Okay.
Jimmy Carter, 1980, 22.
Miserable.
He lost.
Yeah.
Trump, 2020, 13.
Not great.
He lost.
Right.
Reagan, 84, 11.6. He won. Reagan was able to make the case that things are getting better.
Yeah, I can help with that. No.
Yeah. Bush, 92, 10.9. He lost. Obama, 2012, 9.9. He won. Again, Obama was able to say that, it was like 35 2 weeks ago. So we're really
right, yes.
coming from a good place.
Financial
Bush
collapse.
2004, 8.9. He won because forget about all of that. 9/11, 9/11, 9/11. Clinton 96 also had the returning at around 8.5, and he won. Okay, currently,
Yeah.
7.7.
All right.
We're nowhere near the 22% of Carter, which is how Republicans play it.
Yes.
Let's go back to the Ronald Reagan playbook and talk about stagflation. We're nowhere near that. The economy is actually in pretty decent shape based on this number.
Yeah. What's an average number? I don't even know.
Well, for a presidential year,
I mean, yeah, it sounds like
this is
lately
almost
it's-
all of them.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's very few you haven't named. So, I mean, in recent years. So, yeah, I guess the average is about this or higher because he's the lowest one you named.
It'd be nice if it were lower.
Sure, I
but it's
like
not.
to get rid of misery.
Yeah. So that's the background for the new NBC Wall Street Journal poll that's out. It's actually an NBC poll. It doesn't look like it's Wall Street Journal this time.
Now I'm miserable. All right.
And in the new NBC poll for the 24 GOP primary,
The 24 GOP candidates
yeah.
in the primary.
Trump 51, up 5. DeSantis 22, down 9.
9.
To know Ron is to hate Ron.
Yeah.
Pence at 7, he's up 1.
I can't believe it.
Christie is at 5, he's up 5.
Ta-da.
All of which is in New Hampshire, I think.
Oh, all right.
Haley 4, Nikki Haley, she's up 1. Ramaswamy, he's up 1.
2.
They're all taking from DeSantis. And Scott's at 3 and stays at 3, and Hutchinson's at 2, and he's, if anything, down 1. And in the general election matchup, Biden's 49, Trump 45, Biden 47, DeSantis 47. DeSantis is not going to be the nominee, and if you were paying attention to him as the nominee, he'd sink like a stone like he always does, so don't pay too much attention to those DeSantis numbers. And as we talked about, head-to-heads at this early juncture mean absolutely nothing. It's just of interest. What is of interest is that, people are wringing their hands about, the nomination for Trump seems to be headed in Trump's direction, despite the fact that he's been indicted. And, if the Access Hollywood tape doesn't make a difference, then nothing does. The fact is that evangelicals who power the Republican primaries see this as a transactional issue. And more than just transactional. It isn't just a trade. They would rather support Donald Trump, who is clearly not one of them and a flawed candidate and against everything they stand for. Because if Trump wins, Trump owes them.
I see.
If Mike Pence wins, who is clearly one of them, believes everything that they believe in his heart, if he wins, Pence will say it's due to God, not to,
My fellow evangelicals.
Ralph Reed.
Nah.
I owe him nothing.
Now,
So Reed
their
and his
interests
ilk
should
say,
align, but
we'd clearly rather go with Trump because if Trump wins, he feels like he owes us
right.
and he'll give us all the judges we want. And if Pence wins, he owes us nothing. And what's the point of that? He might try to be fair. That's not what we're looking for. So
All
it's
right.
pretty clear why Trump support is what it is.
That's a good theory.
Everybody who supports Trump figures that if Trump wins, Trump will feel obligated to support whatever it is they want.
I will point out that Trump is not great about meeting his obligations.
That's another story. Delusion is delusion,
All right. Yeah.
And their delusional world is that it'd be a better place if people would listen, but there's a lot of stuff they're wrong about. One of the things they're wrong about is that, if they do a service for Trump, Trump will pay them.
Yeah. I mean,
Hello?
that's wrong. I don't know how to speak to them
Ask
in a way
his
that
lawyers.
make it work, but I mean, thou shalt not believe that Trump will meet his obligations. There you go. God
Thou shalt
told you.
not pay.
You just heard me. And now it's serious. All right.
That's Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment is don't trash fellow Republicans, and the
Right.
12th commandment is thou shalt not be paid.
Yeah, pretty much. It's okay. It's
Right, so that's the background for a lot
not
of that
going to
stuff.
work out. But they're used to
So-
being disappointed in politics too.
Simon Rosenberg of the Hopium Chronicles
Ah,
takes a good look a good news look at the NBC poll. Everybody else is wringing their hands and saying, look how close it is.
Yeah, my hands are killing me.
Abortion is still a major issue Republicans have no answer to, and Democrats are going to play that up. It's way too early for people to be focusing. Normal people don't really care about, like, the election. They've got the apathy that Putin has, only you don't need to teach it. They already have it.
Okay.
Most people aren't that interested in politics. But when push comes to shove and it's time to vote, we know how they vote on abortion. And the economy, as I said, is in pretty good shape. So these are all reasonably good signs for Biden, not reasonably bad ones. Oh, but he's not pulling ahead. He's not ahead by 15. Well, hello. So new NBC poll is a good one for Biden and the Dems, writes Simon Rosenberg. I try not to write on weekends, but this poll came out this morning, so I feel like I had to. Number one, Biden leads Trump 49-45. He leads women 55-38. 18 to 34-year-olds 65 to 30, Latinos 66 to 26, Indies 47 to 33. Those are good, healthy numbers.
Yeah.
Democrats lead in the congressional generic 48-46, which is up a point from January.
That's nice.
Trump's lead over DeSantis doubles from 46-31 to 51-22, from up 15 to up 29.
All right.
Big problem for the Florida governor. And like other polls, DeSantis is already remarkably unpopular with the overall electorate. He's minus 16, approve, disapprove, like, dislike sort of thing. He's minus 19 in civics, and Biden's minus 9. And while voters don't have a lot of information about DeSantis, what they do have so far is really bad. It suggests, like Trump, he may have a low general election ceiling. I, Simon Rosenberg, remains really surprised by how intense his negatives are. It has to be the most worrisome data out there right now for the Republicans. It suggests that problems go far beyond Trump. Here's how the positive-negative questions come out. Biden is 39-48 at minus 9, DeSantis 30-46 minus 16, and Trump is 34-56 minus 22.
Yeah.
And as we saw in 2022, the Biden approval rating is once again not a good gauge for understanding the election this cycle. While he may not be popular, he's more popular than his opponents. The constant focus on his low approval rating led a lot of commentators astray in 2022. It's doing so again this year. The most powerful force in American politics over the last 3 election cycles has been fear and opposition to MAGA. And if you aren't talking about that, you're leaving out the most important part of the story.
Okay. I believe it.
So a lot of people say, well, Biden is only a middlingly strong candidate.
Okay.
And he only wins against Trump.
Whoa.
Trump's going to be the nominee.
Yeah, I mean, he
so
only
that means
wins
he wins
against
against
Trump. All right,
Trump.
so he's a specialist. Like, are you saying I should pinch hit someone who's never beat Trump?
Right. Exactly.
I don't know what to tell you.
Right. The guy can only hit lefties, but, is a lefty pitcher.
Right. I mean, I don't know.
Yes, but he can't do all these other things. He can't field, he can't run, he can't hit right. There's a lefty pitching, and he's at the plate.
Moneyball tells you what to do. It's right here in the
and
spreadsheet.
Nobody out.
Okay.
Yeah, but he's a special. Yeah, but he's in a really strong.
I'm not saying I'm going to run him once he gets on base. I'm saying he's got to take the at bat.
I may pinch run for him, But hey, so also amongst the Democratic base, Kamala Harris remains popular, even though nobody likes to talk about her.
Oh, I don't
except
mind.
to disrespect her.
Oh. Yeah, people still do.
And, Biden's in pretty good shape for election. Yes, he's old. Yes, it bothers people.
True.
But when he's up and campaigning, that sort of takes care of he can't even get off the couch without his handlers. They tried that during the last election. Biden wouldn't leave the basement. He's afraid to leave. He's incoherent and stuff. That goes away when he actually speaks. Again, when he's like giving the State of the Union and dueling with Republicans, getting them to support Medicare and Social Security, which was pretty deft.
Mm-hmm.
And he did it well. And yes, he's plain spoken, and he puts his foot in his mouth a lot with things that he says.
Yeah.
And
he did that
he's a normal person, and normies don't really care about that. Only newspaper reporters care about that.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, there was another poll out. I don't have this at my fingertips, but I think it was by Philip Bump. So I'll try to find it for when everybody does the roundup for you.
All right.
And Twist a Cat and other folks put this together. The data from various polls show that Trump has gained support from just about every Republican demographic.
All right.
From a couple of months ago till now. The non-college educated, women. The only people.
Crazy cat ladies.
The only people that Trump hasn't gained support from are the college educated.
That's why they hate college so much.
And that seems to be the only group of people supporting Ron DeSantis within the Republican Party.
The college educated?
Yeah.
Oh.
Which isn't an enormous demographic, which is why DeSantis can't win.
Oh, well, all right.
So I looked at that data and said, you know what
okay.
this tells me? It tells me the conservative pundits support Ron DeSantis.
Oh, yeah.
They went to college.
All right. Mostly, right.
There are like 9 of them.
That's how they became
and,
pundits.
That's not enough to win.
They write the annoying counter zeitgeist columns in the college newspapers and then go on to right-wing, not welfare careers.
Right.
Okay. So they're into DeSantis, are they?
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
see about
who
that.
is?
Yeah. Well, burn your columns. See what happens.
Here's the
then.
column. A different way of visualizing the 2024 Republican race. And I will send that over to you along with the graphic that sort of illustrates the whole point. It's comparing June, which is now,
Yeah. All right.
to March.
That was then.
Okay.
This is now.
And this is now. And let me just take a screenshot of you. This is from CNN polling.
Okay. Is it in this article? Oh, wow. What is this?
And this is a blob of color showing you
Yeah.
that if you look at each axis, the further out you are, the more support you have. And Trump is in pink.
I see.
And he gets support
He's a pink
from
slime.
men, from women, from under 50,
This is
65 and up,
bizarre.
people with no degree. But when it comes to college degree, which is at the 7 o'clock portion of this blob, Trump's support shrinks to nothing. And that's the one area where Ron DeSantis or somebody else leads him.
I see. Okay. I get it. I understand it now. It's a very odd graphic.
It's different. It's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah. It's like,
But
somebody
really
gave
quite
the data
revealing once you
scientists-
get the picture of what it is he's trying to tell you here.
I think the data scientists ate some edibles over the weekend. And
All right. But yeah, I mean, it's magic mushroom stuff. But this is what it looked like in March, the same picture.
Oh.
And you can see where other or DeSantis's appeal has not grown at all.
No.
From then to now. And the other than either one of them was almost as big as Trump. And the other has just shrunk to nothing.
Okay.
So Trump
Yes,
has expanded his lead everywhere except college educated, who still support DeSantis.
Yes, but in March they were open to other people, and I guess now they've said, all right, nobody else is going to...
We looked at other people. There isn't anybody.
Yeah,
really.
we'll go with DeSantis, but we're not happy about it.
Exactly. And there you have conservative punditry.
But we
To me,
know
this
we're not
just tells you exactly where they're coming
because
from.
we're so
And how come it
educated.
is the way it is.
Interesting. It is this
Now, that's not what
round
Bump said.
axis
He's just
thingy.
talking about generics. But to me, I'm just reading this as college educated. That's a conservative pundit.
Yeah, probably. This looks like Antarctica. I think
Doesn't
because
it?
of the circle, it looks like it's the bottom of the globe. But what an interesting,
Well, it's the bottom of the treasure.
multi-axis thing. So that is a very bizarre, but not difficult to understand graphic, and it comes from this article.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when we include that, everyone can go and take a look at this wacky set of data visualization. They had a lot of data and not sure how to tell everybody all these things. Bar graph is, I guess, what they'd usually do, but this is better. I think. More interesting. Looks like
So
a
what
picture. dish,
Bump
too.
says is, look, all we're capturing here really is that DeSantis' support slipped, but it did so almost universally. Back in March, DeSantis was running even with Trump among men and conservatives. He was leading among voters over the age of 49 and with those with college degrees. The other people pool was still strong. Or more usefully, DeSantis contracted tremendously from March till now, if you just look at DeSantis alone.
Yes.
And the next
What
picture
color was
just
he
looks
again?
at DeSantis alone, where you could see it really clearly,
Okay. Oh, yeah.
which I'll take a picture of and give to you.
DeSantis is the blue.
And DeSantis, all of a sudden, like, goes from the gray area, which was really popular with everybody, to like everybody shrunk. That looks like Antarctica melting.
Yeah, right. All the ice shelf is melting. He's contracting and losing support. I would say, yeah, every single axis here.
Right. So when you show me a poll saying, well, DeSantis is running even with Biden, I will quote Rick Hasson talking about a different subject and say, well, the technical term for that is bullshit.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to say he's running even with Biden in the Republican primary. Biden is not very popular in the Republican primary, as it turns out, and neither is DeSantis. So, all right. That's wild. And what an interesting visualization. Again, so I encourage everybody to go and take a look. We'll give you the link, but you may already be there. If you're listening live, you've dashed over to the... Where? What are we looking at? Oh, Philip Bump in the Washington Post. Okay. You can all find that.
It's right there. A different way of visualizing the 2024 Republican primary is what the article is called. And meanwhile, just to put this into regional play, Jonathan Oosting, reporter, writes that he talked to Wayne Bradley of Oakland County, very populous county, Michigan.
All right.
Former director of African American engagement for the Michigan GOP. Wayne Bradley says, if I have to put money on it right now, Trump will be our candidate and he'll lose again to Biden. Unequivocally.
All right.
We lose.
Good. They lose.
Right. And a commentator to that, who describes herself as a conservative homeschooler and graphics designer, says, I made thousands of phone calls for the GOP during this past election, and voters were vehemently opposed to any candidate that was Trump endorsed.
Mm-hmm. Well, good.
So, anecdotes, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So how do people handle this? They go back to their playbooks. They try, except for Chris Christie, they try to dance around the fact that Trump is running and they're afraid to take him on. Mike Pence says, oh, well, let's just ban abortion. That's real popular.
Oh, yeah. I'm
like
sure
it's the major issue
attention.
that powered the red wave to disappear. But he's all in on it.
Right. He has not gotten an updated, and there is no updated candidate box. The ones he has are from the 80s and 90s, and it still says bash abortion.
Yeah. Do you remember, says Nikki Haley, when you were growing up, do you remember how simple life was, how easy it felt? It was about faith, family, and country. We can have that again, but to do that, we have to vote Joe Biden out.
Oh. Well, you
and
were
Ben
a child.
Collins, reporter who looks at the right wing for MSNBC, says, do you remember growing up? Division didn't exist in America. Neither did addition, multiplication. We hadn't been taught yet woke math. Oh. The numbers only went up to 37. China was 15 feet away and accessible by a hole in the ground. Oh, also, peekaboo was terrifying and permanent.
It's basically the issue here. Do you remember when you didn't know anything yet and you were simple and you were a child and people fed you? Yeah.
And that's their freaking platform.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is many social observers have said in the past is if you wait long enough, you will go back to that. People will be feeding you again and changing your sheets and you don't have to provide for yourself. Right. Yeah. Eventually. But yeah, it is pretty, it's an interesting, I know that everyone loves nostalgia, but it was A, it was never like that, and B, if it was because you were a child, and C, the complications that she's complaining of. It was only good for
John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart, that's the fact.
Well, that's one thing. It was never great for anybody else, but yeah, the complication part of it is, you didn't have to worry about treating people with respect or allowing civil rights for certain people, and if you wanted a seat on the bus, you could always get one.
Any sort of joke about anybody.
Yeah. And if there was somebody sitting in your seat at the front of the bus, you could make a move. So you didn't have to walk all the way back. Life was simpler then. Mm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you wanted, people to build a manor house for you on your plantation, you whip them until they build it. Easy.
Anyway, conservative stalwart J. Michael Luttig There's a very interesting
yeah.
article in the New York Times.
Took him forever.
He
to
always
read it
writes
out loud.
interesting articles. And this one is just worth quoting as we close out the hour.
All right.
He says, look, Donald Trump this month became the first former or incumbent American president to be charged with crimes against the nation. He cynically calculated his indictment would ensure that a riled-up Republican Party would nominate him.
Yeah.
In a word, the Republicans are as responsible as Mr. Trump for this month's indictment and will be as responsible for any indictment and prosecution of him for January 6th. One would think that for a party that prided itself for caring about the Constitution and the rule of law, this would stir some measure of self-reflection among party officials and even voters about their abiding support for the former president. But by all appearances, it certainly hasn't occurred to them yet that any reckoning is needed. And pointing all of that out is true. There's no stopping Republicans now until they've succeeded in completely politicizing the rule of law and surfaced to their partisan political ends. There's no path to the White House for Republicans with Mr. Trump. He would need every single Republican and independent vote, and there are untold numbers of Republicans and independents who will never vote for him. Again, that's why the polls that you read right now are, to use a technical term, bullshit.
Right. All this technicality these days.
Right. Republicans have waited in vain for political absolution. It's finally time for them to put the country before their party, pull back from the brink for the good of the party. If not now, they must forever hold their peace. Again, that's why it's important, which is not the same thing as successful, that Chris Christie speaks out the way he does.
Yes.
He basically holds up a mirror and saying, you people are a bunch of hypocrites.
Yeah, well.
And they'll say, well, I don't like you calling us that. We're not going to vote for you. And Christie says, I don't care. Look in the mirror.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly good. It was a little misleading. The title they used for his piece, it's not too late for the Republican Party. It strongly suggests that it is, in fact, too late for the Republican Party. But
all the analysis of this piece that I've seen has said, great article, terrible headline. New York Times.
I guess. I mean,
I'll bet he didn't write the headline.
Right.
I bet the New York Times did.
Yeah, or maybe he dictated and it took him so long to say it that they said, forget it, I'll write the headline.
No,
Deadline
I think they just went ahead and wrote the headline.
That could be. And that's the sort of thing that would get eyes among the New York Times readership. It isn't. It's not too late. I think I'll read about why, because I thought it was too late.
Oh, all you published here was a mirror.
Yeah. What do you know? Well, Michael Ludwig, the famous, the slowest talker ever to testify, but he writes pretty quick, I guess. You can read it as fast as you want.
Anyway, that's the story. I'll see you on Wednesday.
Very good. We'll see whether there's any civil
We didn't even get to my my issue about procedure.
Oh, right.
Can I stay on and do that a little bit?
You can. Well, procedure.
All is fine.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin asked at the end of the break whether he could stay on to discuss an issue of procedure, and I said he could, but I realized that's not procedurally sound. We either have to ask unanimous consent that he be allowed or make a motion to proceed to a second hour of commentary, technically speaking, but then and he did ask, do we have a sufficient second for this motion, and this being a two-man operation at the moment, we sufficient second is the same thing as unanimous consent. So I guess
I think we have to vote on the rule before we can proceed to the actual.
All right. Well, let's say you'll be limited to an hour, which is the usual case in the House, and that's all we have left. After that, we need consent from Justice Putnam. So. All right.
So Matt Glassman, who is an academic but a congressional expert,
but an okay one.
Yeah. House procedure nerd, he calls himself. Wrote this back in 2019 when Nancy Pelosi's House was getting ready to impeach.
Well, yeah, same difference.
Congressional indictment. Donald Trump, where the trial goes over to the Senate, run by Mitch McConnell.
Right.
So Democratic House, Republican Senate.
Yes.
Now we have a Democratic Senate and a Republican House.
Right.
But the issue on the table was the process for impeachment. And it's relevant now because Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene want to impeach not only a bunch of Biden cabinet figures, but Biden himself.
Right.
So here's the question. And Matt Glassman writes back in 2019, there's confusion about whether a House impeachment compels a Senate trial. This is in part because it's actually confusing. But it's also because people are actually addressing a variety of different questions. So I'm going to try to clarify the questions, he says. And these are questions that are going to come up because it's going to come up with Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene. So that's why I thought, given the fact that nobody really has any answers to either the polling or the 2024 election or what's going on in Russia, we talk about something a little more concrete here.
All right. So like the setting here was 2019 when it was possible that you could send an impeachment to Mitch McConnell, like
from
you
one
sent
party's
him,
chamber to another party's chamber.
but like you had sent him the Merrick Garland nomination for the Supreme Court, and he said, "I'm not going to consider it." Could he do the same thing with the Trump impeachment? Okay.
Right.
Yes.
So I'll provide some tentative answers, Glassman says, though it's important to remember there's some things here that are unprecedented. For instance, and I didn't know this, in 2019, that's the first time we had an impeachment where control of the House and Senate were in different parties.
Okay. Well, there aren't a lot of impeachments prior to that.
So question one, does the Constitution require the Senate to act on a House impeachment?
Okay.
Question number two, do the Senate rules require the Senate to act on a House impeachment?
Okay.
Question three, can the Senate ignore its own rules if it feels like it?
Sure. Of course.
Number four, can Majority Leader McConnell at this point, or now as Majority Leader Schumer,
okay, right,
unilaterally ignore the Senate rules? Question five, can the Senate change its rules?
Maybe.
Right. Question six, can Majority Leader McConnell unilaterally change the Senate rules? And question seven, how would you sum up the bottom line about the Senate impeachment in plain English?
Oh, well.
And those are the questions. And so
right.
he takes them on. Question one, does the Constitution require the Senate to act in any way? And that's almost certainly a no. And that's based on constitutional provision in Article 1, Section 2.
All right.
The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside. No person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than removal of office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any other office under the United States, but the party convicted shall nonetheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. Right? But it doesn't say anything about they have to.
Yeah, I guess depending on the shall, what are they talking about? Shall what? Shall have
what?
the sole power of impeachment, which should include the power not to have one, or if you have any power at all, it's the power is that you shall preside over this impeachment.
Right, you preside, but you don't. Maybe you are forced to take a vote.
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean that you have to take a trial.
Okay.
So, and Matt Glassman invokes what you invoked.
Oh,
See
all right,
Merrick
then.
Garland.
All right.
They could passively not act.
I guess that's a possibility.
Question two. Do the Senate rules require the Senate to act? And that's not 100% clear, but 99% clear. The answer is yes. Current Senate rules make substantial provisions for impeachment, and there's a whole section about it. Such articles being presented, the Senate shall at 1 o'clock of the day, Sunday accepted, following such presentation, or sooner if ordered by the Senate, proceed to consideration.
Okay.
So those rules say, yeah, well, the Constitution doesn't say we have to do it, but the Senate rules say we do.
Okay.
And that's why the question comes up, okay, well, can the Senate ignore its own rules? And the answer is yes.
No, always the case.
But you need unanimous consent.
Well, that would certainly be the easiest way of doing it.
Yeah. But it can also happen passively. If the Senate or House is doing something in violation of its rules, there's no referee. Any member can raise a point of order, but then you vote on it.
Yeah, and sometimes you can ignore the referee if you want.
Right? The Senate could choose to overrule a point of order. The Senate's in control of its own precedent and shut down the ability to get to the impeachment trial. But that will take a vote. And that's why there needs to be at least a vote. Because you can have unanimous consent that says, oh, we're not going to do this. And if somebody, Rand Paul, objects, or Tommy Tuberville, says, "Oh, I object. I want my friend Lauren Boebert's impeachment thing here to go," then Chuck Schumer would say, "Well, raise it as a point of order."
Yes.
And Tuberville will turn to his fellow senators and or his staff and say, "What's that?" And they'll tell him.
Yeah.
And so he'll raise a point of order, and then you vote on it.
Yes.
And the Senate can vote to overrule Tuberville.
I mean, no one imagines that this would be the way things would go, but one of the ways you can manufacture unanimous consent is not, you don't necessarily have to ask unanimous consent. If nobody says anything, like the House impeaches him and they send over an impeachment, and then nobody says, should we have a thing now? Like if nobody asks, right, you just sit around looking at each other. That's unanimous consent not to bring it up. But nobody actually asks unanimous consent. Nobody brings it up. And then what do you do?
Then it doesn't happen. Right? So there's the passive way of doing nothing, which requires everybody to cooperate.
Unanimous consent. Right. Right. Everybody would have to universally say, this is not worth my time, and I don't want to be the person to bring it up.
Ignore it, or you have to have unanimous consent to suspend the rules.
Yes, in order to do it instantly. Yes. Otherwise, in order to do it without her having a vote. Yes.
Right. Or... And this is where Matt Glassman's trying to clarify things. He says this is where a lot of the confusion comes in. The Senate can always change its rules. It can always set new precedents. It can always decide what it will and will not consider. But it can't do any of that without a vote.
Right.
So the majority has to vote, yeah, that's true. So if nobody objects, you can passively ignore it in one way or another. If somebody objects, then you have to have at least one vote where majority says, nah, shut up and sit down.
Yeah.
And that's basically where that stands. And I just think it was interesting because it's going to come up.
Yes, it certainly could, especially if... I
like to bring up these arcane things before they happen because they're going to happen.
Yeah.
Like with Rules Committee.
Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, if you bring an impeachment action against Biden in particular, the one like Lauren Boebert proposes, which doesn't appear to have any like real grounding in anything, the Senate could just, I guess, decide for whatever reason. But you'd have to have everybody agree this is just unripe as an impeachment indictment. We're just not going to consider this thing. But that would mean, convincing the Tommy Tubervilles of the world that that's a good idea, and consider where we are with him in his fifth month of blockading all military promotions.
Right, in the middle of a Russian crisis.
Yes.
So Matt Glassman says, so here's another question. Can Majority Leader McConnell, in that case, or in this case Schumer, unilaterally ignore the Senate rules regarding impeachment? And the answer is no. Only the Senate as a body can make those kinds of decisions. People will often say for shorthand, McConnell's going to bring this up or McConnell won't bring it up.
Right.
But that is only shorthand for McConnell has the acquiescence of a majority of the Senate to bring this up or not allow this. It is the majority that gives McConnell agenda control. And if a majority doesn't want to do what McConnell wants to do, they can do whatever they want.
Right.
On anything.
So I'll caution everybody by saying long term, that's the explanation. Like short term, it takes a while for people to come to the realization, is he ignoring this impeachment? Like if it just shows up and he doesn't immediately say, all right, we're taking up the impeachment, people might wait 5-10 minutes and say,
Right. So this is important in context of an impeachment trial. If a majority of the Senate, and this helps explain why under Mitch McConnell, the Senate went ahead and had a trial.
Yes.
Because you'd step back and think, well, the Republicans don't want this.
Why didn't they just not do it?
Why don't they just not do it? And the answer is they couldn't.
Okay.
Certainly they were not going to get unanimous consent with Trump.
Right.
In impeachment. They're not going to do that. And they didn't have the votes to just block it. So this is important, writes Matt Glassman in 2019, in context of an impeachment trial. If a majority of Senate wants to have a trial, there's nothing McConnell can do to stop it. Even if Romney or Murkowski or Collins or at the time Lamont Alexander don't want to convict, if they want a dignified trial, they're going to get one.
All right.
And that's what happened.
Yeah. Well,
right. So in the course of normal Senate business, it's become custom for the majority party to defer to the majority leader. But if and when the majority leader tries to cross the determined majority, not going to happen.
Yeah, then he's not leading a majority.
That, that's the overrule the parliamentarian question.
Pretty much.
Or the trolley problem.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So now that comes up again, and our Democrats can ponder what do they do with a nonsense impeachment that's handed to them by the House.
Right. And again, that's why I think it's important to go over so at least we understand what the rules are here.
Okay.
Can the Senate change its rules? Sure.
Ah.
They have to set specific rules for any trial, and the Senate's always free to adjust its rules as it sees fit. But when I say the Senate, I mean the Senate, capital letters. Changing the rules and reinterpreting this means the Senate does it, majority, recorded vote. You can't just do it by fiat.
Okay.
So it's not up to Schumer to do this or not. Can Majority Leader McConnell unilaterally change the Senate rules regarding impeachment? Absolutely not. Well, we just discussed that. So how would you sum up the bottom line about the Senate and impeachment in plain English? Here's a one-liner. The Constitution doesn't require a trial. Current Senate rules do require a trial. The Senate could unanimously ignore the rules. A majority could change the rules or dispose of the trial. And a charge disposal would require at least one recorded vote. That's where it stands.
Okay. I think that's reasonable. I don't know if I would agree that counts as one sentence. But, I mean, if you can punctuate it that way, sure. But you would get
No, it's
marked
actually
up.
several sentences. But other than that, he says, look, I hope the thread is shown why it's so hard to talk about this. Under current rules, there will almost certainly be a trial. And, in fact, he's right, there was. And therefore, there's no way to passively bury an impeachment the way the Garland nomination was disposed of via inaction because the rules are different. If the Senate doesn't want to conduct the trial or wants to dispose of the trial in 10 minutes, a majority has to back that. And that means you'll need to find 50 senators to vote for a change of the rules or dispose of the trial. And is that going to happen? Hard to say. Now, currently, with the Senate having a slim Democratic majority, not going to happen.
You mean too slim for it to happen?
It's too slim for Schumer to basically dictate what's going to occur.
Yeah.
Whatever has to happen
first.
with a majority of the vote. Now, interestingly, the Democrats could vote to say there's not going to be a trial. I can't just unilaterally say that, says Schumer. It would require a rules change. But we're going to vote on a rules change.
Yeah.
And the rules change is going to be changed to, we're not doing this.
Yes. Or rather, more likely, right. We bring this up every time there's that shorthand used. The setting of a new precedent, a new interpretation of the rules without changing what's written. They just say, we think this means that we don't have to have this trial.
Yeah, we think that basically this is technically bullshit. Therefore, we don't have to have the trial. We're going to vote on that.
I have you on for an extended period of time. Now I got another one. Okay. Yes, that's true. They can do that. And I guess I'll say the usual mindset here, the usual answer to something like this is, yeah, well, but you're talking about changing the precedents. That's usually, that fits into our nuclear option style thinking, and that means that Manchin and Sinema are no's. But this isn't a question of whether or not you would be getting rid of the filibuster. This is a question of you'd be asking. Manchin's a cranky guy. I mean, he doesn't.
But he's not going to impeach a Democratic president.
Yeah, that's not likely to happen. And if you give him the option to say, you two, if you vote along with us, we can just say, this is crankery. We're going to, we're going to 2 seconds, we'll get rid of this thing. We're going to dump this stupid impeachment.
And by the way, because this occurs to me and it would occur to our listeners, remind me, does the vice president have any role whatsoever in this? This is Senate rule stuff.
Yeah, if you have like a tie, obviously that's the only time you normally. But on a question of Senate rules, does the vice president get a tie-breaking vote? I don't know. Now that I think about it, like, is that restricted to questions of passage of legislation, or
you don't have to answer that now?
Yeah, I don't know.
Throw that out there
I'll
because
think about that one.
Everything's interesting.
Yes. Of course, if you really need them and they don't have the vote, you could still have them in the chair for the ruling, and then they would hand you the ruling you want, and then that could happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. All right. Well, we'll see. There's also other procedural issues regarding impeachment, too, that we have to keep an eye on, that things are less clear. There's less to rely on, and Republicans are trying to do it, so maybe examining the rules doesn't help anybody anyway. But I guess there's a new movement on that McCarthy has expressed his support for, in which they would offer a resolution in the House to expunge Trump's 2 impeachments somehow, like from the record. Like, we, as the House of Representatives, the body that voted to impeach Trump twice, we now vote to say that never happened, and there's no precedent established by it, and you can't impeach a future president for the same things because that was baseless when we did it, which, of course, they would immediately reverse the minute they discover that they think that Joe Biden or any other Democrat might have done these things, or they manufacture those charges. We're going to reverse that. But that's an invention of a new thing, expunging impeachments from the record, which, as it stands, is not a thing. But can the House pass a resolution if they want to that says they expunge it? Yes. Does it have any effect? I don't know. Up until the time another House says you can't expunge things, we expunge the expungement. But, stranger things have happened. So I just want to put that out there.
I just like to step back and say, listen, there's a lot of situations and a lot of circumstances where people watch what goes on in Congress, especially when Congress is closely divided, as the Senate and House currently are, and as the Senate and House are from each other, and say, well, why don't the Democrats do this, or why don't the Democrats do that?
Why don't they?
And usually the answer is it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's not so easy to do what you're asking us to do. And shorthand for, well, why don't they just push it through, is that in the Senate, that's almost impossible. And in the House, it's really difficult.
Yeah, or it might not be a long-term a good idea. I don't know. I didn't put anything aside, it looks like, about that story, because it hasn't developed to the point where we know what to say about it, other than a crazy person said, why don't we just, and it's never a good idea to govern this way. Why don't you just blah, blah, blah? Why don't you just expunge the record?
Does that require the Senate to agree?
I wouldn't think so.
Otherwise, the Senate will have records of having a trial that the House said never existed.
Yeah. I don't think it requires anything of the Senate. It doesn't compel the Senate to agree that it's been expunged. They would be like, you say it's expunged, but we have the record. Or other people will say, I watched it on C-SPAN. It happened. And it might be interesting. They might find that that's a bridge too far. It might be too much trouble for them, and realize, it's going to make all the people who thought that the Democrats were exaggerating things when they said Republicans are interested in rewriting history. Like, if we literally rewrite history in front of everybody and they all remember that Trump fans will be happy, and they might actually believe that the record's been expunged and that it's a legitimate thing to say that Trump was not impeached now. But the rest of America and the world will say, I told you these guys were crazy. And, some number of people who weren't convinced before, even if it's tiny, will now agree. Republicans do rewrite history. I saw them do it. You were right. I mean, I don't know. Jennifer Rubin came around, so maybe someone else will too. Right? So, anyway, open question. Can you simply, by brute force, declare that this piece of history didn't happen, or at least that for the purposes of, what we'll walk around saying as Republicans in the House, are we going to, I guess it's like if they have a meeting and they say, we're going to call it the Democrat Party. That's not what it says on paper. It says Democratic. We're going to just say the Democrat Party. That's now true, I guess, for a certain segment of the population. They keep saying it. So, I don't know. I guess it's like saying that January 6th rioters were tourists. Some people continue to insist that that's the case and keep saying it. The rest of the country looks at you like you're a bunch of weirdos, but they are saying it. Can they walk around saying Trump was never impeached? I guess they could. if they're walking around saying that the election was stolen.
Right.
So why not?
Anyway, I just
Pretty
thought I'd
wacky.
throw that out for thought because I just have a feeling we're going to see a lot of this stuff come up.
I think we'll see more of what you brought up than what I brought up, but just so you know.
All right. And just as I leave, let me give you a breaking story. Supreme Court rules Louisiana's congressional map must be redrawn to add a second majority black district.
Okay.
The justices lift a hold they placed on a lower court's order for a reworked redistricting regime.
All right. So get to work, Louisiana.
So, yeah.
Good. Once again, I start to worry. There's a lot of cases, apparently. All the big cases everybody's been watching supposedly have to be announced this week. This is like the last week of the term. Everybody's thinking it begins tomorrow, but obviously it's begun today. That they have to take care of all these things, including the independent state legislature cases, affirmative action cases, etc. I don't know what happens if they just say, we want more time. I guess they can say they want to do that, just like the Senate. But, yeah, we're waiting on those things. And I'm wondering, when does our luck run out with the Supreme Court worrying about its legacy and legitimacy, and they're making sensible rulings again? Are they setting us up for something crazy later this week?
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, Navigator's survey has something out which ties into our discussion about Ron DeSantis and Antarctica.
Yeah.
Which is to say, just 1 in 4 have heard a lot about Ron DeSantis' announcement for president. The plurality of those who have heard say it didn't go well.
Well, it didn't. They were paying attention to that.
Right.
Okay.
So only 1 in 3 thought DeSantis' president announcement went well.
Uh-huh.
And by a 17-point margin, Americans see Disney as in the right. Only 3 in 10 Americans find making America Florida is appealing. And his favorability has gone down to 32%. His unfavorability has gone up to 48%. So, no, his campaign is not going well at all.
Yeah.
So with that, with
Excellent.
this extended makeup for all the half hours I gave you.
Oh, yeah, right.
I still have some. You have time banked that I owe you, but I'm trying to catch up. And I'll talk to you on Wednesday. We'll see whether there's any other countries that would like to have a mini coup for 24 to 48 hours.
Right, or if that's our country after the Supreme Court comes up with it in the end. Okay.
All righty.
Take
Take care.
Greg. Yeah, you too. And let me know if you have any more procedural questions, I guess. We'll do another half hour. Okay. All right. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left between now and, we got to get rid of the beep beeps, between now and our next break. Boy, he almost did 3 whole segments there. So I found some stories about the expungement stuff just to prove to you that it was going to happen. Let's see here. Reuters came up first. AP is here. You want to go with Reuters? Because it's been a while since we brought the Reuters folks up here. David Morgan reporting when? Today. Updated 37 minutes ago. That must be why they're at the top of the Google search. U.S. House Republicans seek to expunge Trump impeachments. Here is a picture of the execrable Elise Stefanik making that announcement, I guess. Actually, it's a picture of her making an announcement about something about fentanyl. But she's a Republican, and she comments on this, so I guess she gets that, and they didn't have a new photo. So, 2 of Donald Trump's staunchest allies in the U.S. Congress have introduced legislation aimed at expunging the former president's 2 impeachments, a legislative maneuver without precedent, right, in U.S. history. Representative Elise Stefanik, the number 4 House of Representatives Republican, and hardline Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, whom we all know as Murdery Trader Greene, introduced a pair of resolutions that, if enacted, would aim to change the record, quote, as if such articles had never been passed. Republicans control the House 222 to 212, we are reminded. Trump, who was running for re-election in 2024, was twice impeached by then Democratic-controlled House in December of 2019 over Ukraine, and again in January of 2021 for his actions ahead of the deadly January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol by his supporters. Well put. Both times he was acquitted by Senate Republicans. Trump was just the 3rd U.S. president to be impeached by the House, and is the only one in U.S. history to have been impeached twice. The effort to expunge his impeachment is without historical precedent. George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley, whose expert advice Republicans sometimes seek, noted that the U.S. Constitution contains no provision for expunging impeachments. It is not like a constitutional DUI. Once you are impeached, you are impeached, Turley said in an email, which is astonishing for him to take that position, given that we know what the Republicans want out of this, and he's not giving it to them. He'll come around. Turley said expungement could still be historically significant by declaring the earlier impeachments in error. However, that is the view of a different Congress at a different time, he said. Green's 2-page resolution would expunge the 2019 impeachment. She's taking care of Ukraine on that front, saying he was wrongfully accused of misconduct. Stefanik's 6-page measure would overturn his 2021 impeachment on grounds that his opponents failed to prove that he committed high crimes and misdemeanors. But that's actually like what the Senate's role in all of that. I would say that that's an unconstitutional resolution. It's the role of the Senate to decide whether or not he's committed high crimes and misdemeanors. Democrats called the move questionable, saying it demonstrated Republican fealty to the former president. The legality of doing it is highly questionable, but that won't stop Republicans from doing it, says Dan Goldman.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Barely the Kagro in the Morning Show today. Pretty much the Greg Dworkin Show. Thanks very much for the extra time, Greg. Appreciated it. And, well, you know, I always appreciate extra time. It's just fun to talk, but with somebody else there. So, okay, let's see. I left off in the middle of this Reuters article about the expungement idea and ran out of time before being able to tell you or remind you who Dan Goldman was. Dan Goldman was the representative, the Democratic representative, who said that the legality of doing an expungement here is highly questionable, but that won't stop Republicans from doing it, and it's just further placating Donald Trump. Dan Goldman, currently a Democratic congressman, was the lead Democratic counsel in the 2019 impeachment, and he rode that to election in the House afterwards. But Green insisted the move was necessary, calling Trump's impeachments a witch hunt. Where did she get that? That's crazy. One of the former president's favorite terms for the various legal probes he faces. He's the first sitting or former U.S. president to face criminal charges, with prosecutors in New York charging him over hush money payments to a porn star and a federal special prosecutor charging him with unlawfully keeping national security documents after leaving office. Green has separately introduced articles of impeachment against President Joe Biden. But don't worry, we can just expunge them later. 2 members of his cabinet, FBI Director Chris Wray, and a U.S. attorney prosecuting participants in the assault on the U.S. Capitol. On Wednesday, House Republicans censured Democratic Representative Adam Schiff over his leading role in the 2019 Trump impeachment. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, the chamber's number 2 Republican, told reporters that overturning the 2019 impeachment had merit, alleging that Schiff had lied about Trump's wrongdoing. Democrats reject Republican allegations against Schiff, saying he was instead targeted for partisan retribution. The legislation followed an effort by hardline Republican Representative Lauren Boebert to force an impeachment vote against Biden on Wednesday, a move that her own party sidelined by sending the resolution to 2 congressional committees, not just one, but 2. And let's see. That's it. That's the balance of what they've got over at Reuters. I don't think anybody else has anything more because there's nothing more to it, except that I did mention that some reporters were able to ask Kevin McCarthy about it. He said, I support the idea, so what the hell? So maybe they will move forward with it. I'm curious to see how people react to that. Like, I imagine that has to be reported, right? I mean, you would end up seeing articles on that. And would that just convince independents who had been sitting on the fence about whether or not they thought all Republicans were hopelessly Trumpy to think, all right, well, that is just literally straight up rewriting history. And I guess the next question is, doesn't that mean, everyone will want to ask this question, doesn't that mean that a future Democratic House could in fact, 1, unexpunge the expungement? Sure, why not? I guess you could do whatever you want. Could it mean that they expunge Adam Schiff's censure? Sure, I guess you could pass any resolution that you want to. Would Democrats involve themselves in such a thing? Probably not, for a number of reasons. One, not the least of which is they're Democrats and they don't do anything particularly bold like that. And 2, it's not a good precedent. And 2 wrongs don't make a right. But on the other hand, how do you show somebody that the precedent they're setting is in fact bad precedent without bringing it back to bite them, right? How do you not revisit it in order to demonstrate? You say it's a slippery slope. Is it a slippery slope if the other people all say, it's so slippery I refuse to enter onto that slope? That's good advice for people who don't want to fall down on slippery slopes, but when you're trying to teach a lesson to the people who keep saying, I'm going to keep going on these slippery slopes, because people keep saying, oh, it's a slippery slope, don't go there. But I know that the other party in this country loves that advice, and they hate going on slippery slopes. If we're the only ones who go on slippery slopes, who cares? It's only slips in one direction, ours. So why not keep going there? I don't know. Maybe that's something to consider. But, yeah, and for all the people I know, this usually comes up in the context of the Senate, not turning the Senate into the House. Don't do that, because then every time control switches hands, you'll be changing the laws and this and that and going the other direction. Except we already have that rule, and we do change the law all the time, or we attempt to change the law all the time. I mean, if you're like shocked at where could this possibly come from? Were you asleep when the Republicans tried 50 times to repeal Obamacare? It's like, it got passed. You're just going to have to leave it there. No, we have the power to repeal it. Well, you have the power to try, and it hasn't worked. And it didn't work 55 times, and you tried a 56th or whatever it was. The crazy number of votes that they tried to hold on that. Anyway, I guess they never learned any sort of lesson. So, yeah, you could see expungement votes, and that no one can stop it in the House except Republicans themselves. And there might be a few that just say, I understand the sentiment, but this is dumb and we shouldn't be wasting our time with it. It won't change anything. Everyone knows if the impeachment supposedly never happened, then what were we doing voting on the expungement of it, right? Oh, well, in other words, you're only creating an artificial expungement. You're only voting to say, we're going to hold our breath and insist this thing never happened, even as half the country says, no, I remember it happening. And that doesn't look good. And remember that guy who said we shouldn't be the stupid party anymore? Yeah, I remember him, but where is he now? We should be the stupid party, I guess, is the only conclusion you can come up with from that. All right. So on more breaking news, I took a peek at my inbox here, and at first there was the breaking news from the Hill that the Supreme Court clears the way for Louisiana to redo its congressional map. They've followed it up with another extreme emergency breaking news type email that where'd it go? Oh, look, and now they've floated another one. First is that the Supreme Court also has tossed out the Trump D.C. hotel records case. So Armando just jumped off of the top of his building. Can't take it anymore, I'm sure. What's the story here? Supreme Court tosses Trump D.C. hotel records case. Guess we got to mark that for inclusion in the roundup. Zach, I wanted to tell you who wrote it, but The Hill gave me a pop-up and now they won't let me. Zach Schonfeld, I don't know how he pronounces the O in that, Schonfeld. He reports the Supreme Court will no longer hear a case on whether Democratic lawmakers should have been able to sue to obtain documents related to a Washington, D.C. hotel owned by former President Trump. Does anybody know what hotel that might be? After congressional members dismissed the lawsuit, after the High Court last month agreed to hear the Biden Justice Department's appeal on the case, Democrats dismissed the dispute in a lower court. Both sides then wrote to the justices agreeing that the Supreme Court should toss it as moot. I don't know if that was a great idea, but both sides wanted it and they did it. So it's not that surprising or shocking, but anyway, it's a news story. The justices, in a brief unsigned order on Monday, vacated the lower ruling and sent it back with instructions to dismiss the case. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson dissented from the order, saying she would have instead used a different procedural mechanism to toss the case. The hotel documents had fallen largely out of the dispute as lawmakers obtained most of them through other means, but the case was set to weigh how the minority party in Congress can scrutinize a presidential administration using a federal law known as the 7-member rule. The Justice Department had asked the justices to declare that the Democrats could not sue in court to enforce the rule, which allows any 7 members of the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability or any 5 members of the Senate Homeland Security Committee to ask for information within their purview from executive agencies. Interesting. I'm not actually familiar with that one. We might want to spend some time looking into that some other day, but probably not until it's almost too late. And it comes up again and we feel like we got to jump in on it. Okay. Interesting, though. There was another piece of breaking news. I'll go back to the inbox. What was this? McCarthy floats impeachment inquiry into Garland over DOJ weaponization, which is, of course, once again, just an accusation. It's nothing but a confession. And by the way, the original weaponization, if you want to have you want to know how long this stretches back, this problem stretches back, another good word, I would say a good synonym for the weaponization of government is politicization. When we talked about the politicization of the Department of Justice in particular, that takes us all the way back to the George W. Bush administration. And of course, even further, if you really want to dig into it. But I guess that just sort of reminds you how long Republicans have actually been at this, and that their tactic here is to try to reverse the field and say, it's the Democrats who are really doing this, even though, 1, it's not happening, 2, nobody's doing it, and 3, they were the ones who came up with the idea in the first place. They just changed the word and said it's a brand new thing, and Democrats invented it. But no, that's not the case either. All right, running back to Pocket to bring other things to your attention. Let's see. I kind of want to read the Michael Ludwig article, but that'll take too long because it's such a slow, he's, like I said, a slow reader anyway. However, because Greg didn't do it, and I thought he would, because Jennifer Rubin wrote it, I will acquiesce to the reading of a Jennifer Rubin piece today, or at least the headline of such a piece, which came out yesterday, opinion piece. Sheldon Whitehouse was right all along. The dirty effing hippies were right. The Supreme Court is corrupt. What do you know? Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has been arguing for years that a flood of dark money flowing through right-wing front groups has corrupted the Supreme Court. Never has there been more evidence to bolster this claim. Whitehouse told me in an extensive phone interview last week that Justice Samuel Alito's op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, intending to pre-butt a ProPublica story revealing that he failed to disclose gifts from billionaire and right-wing donor Paul Singer and recused from a case involving Singer, was very, very weird. And it was not merely because he took to the op-ed pages of a sympathetic right-wing Rupert Murdoch newspaper as though he were a panicky politician trying to control the damage. If that were his intent, it horribly backfired, because the stunt not only called attention to his angry response and the underlying charges, he managed to make it front-page news. If you were filing a pleading, this would pretty much have failed, the White House observed. The senator ticked off the problems with Alito's argument: factual omissions, e.g. the standard for exempt gifts does not include transportation. Alito's lame effort to turn an airplane into a facility, to jam it into an exempt gift category, doesn't pass the laugh test, White House said. Alito's plea that he couldn't possibly have known Singer had a financial stake, $2 billion financial stake, in the outcome of a case before the court, although it was widely reported in the media, and insistence that yet another billionaire was a friend, which somehow absolved him from his obligation to report the gifts of hospitality. And White House argued it strains credulity that Alito, like Justice Clarence Thomas, could be confused about reporting requirements when there is a financial disclosure committee expressly set up to help judges navigate these issues. All in all, the poorly reasoned argument amounted to what White House called a painful exhibit for an actual ethics code, a bill he co-authored with Judiciary Chairman Dick Durbin, set to be marked up after July 4th, would confirm that the code of ethics applicable to all judges applies to the High Court, set up a process for screening ethics complaints, and allow chief judges of the circuit to advise on how their circuits handle similar matters. This is not remotely unconstitutional, he noted. White House wryly remarked that the last thing the justices want is comparison to circuit courts' conduct. The best way to show that a stick is crooked is to lay a straight stick alongside it, he said. White House is merely asking for the court to develop a process that the judicial branch would oversee for the sake of restoring confidence in the Supreme Court. Yet another poll, this time from Quinnipiac, shows the court's approval at an all-time low, 29%. Don't they care? White House surmises that some justices resent anyone questioning their conduct. But more troubling, he worries that the Chief Justice has yet to promise a mandatory ethics scheme, nor has there been a chink in the omerta armor of the other justices. Any one of them could come forward and acknowledge the problem. When asked to testify before Congress on ethics reform, Chief Justice John Roberts, who heads the Judicial Conference, an entity created by Congress and dedicated to court administration, refused to come. Mind you, Roberts was not being asked to testify, or was not being asked to testify not about the court's, there's a lot of knots in there, decisions or internal debates, but about his own administrative role. I think one of the knots doesn't belong. White House said that Roberts' refusal was astonishing. White House has long maintained that the court's unprincipled, outcome-oriented, and partisan decision-making is very much linked to the ethics problem. The ethics problem is not just relevant to expensive gifts and fancy vacations, he told me. The ethics issues don't occur in a vacuum, he said. They point to a bigger enterprise whose purpose is to capture the court. White House explained that dark money groups such as the Federalist Society, led for years by Leonard Leo, put together a list of acceptable high court nominees from which President Donald Trump picked 3 justices. A closely aligned entity, the Judicial Crisis Network, spent millions to help get the justices confirmed while donating to Senate Republicans to guarantee their support. Leo and others in dark money groups filed amicus briefs to advance their agenda, and then Leo set up cozy connections between the billionaire donors and the justices for hospitality from their friends. Leo arranged Alito's fishing jaunt and helped set up Thomas with billionaire Harlan Crow. If you put together billionaires, dark money, and phony front groups, you wind up in a whole new world, he argued. Even if White House's ideal ethics bill got passed, currently impossible with the GOP majority in the House and the filibuster in the Senate, major problems would remain with the court. White House does not, for now, want to get out over our skis in jumping to court expansion, one proposed solution for the court's issues. The country isn't there yet, in his view. Yes, we are. However, the public knows enough about the troubles at the court to support reasonable term limits. Well, that's a lot harder to get than expansion of the court. No constitutional amendment required to expand the court. White House is well aware that the constitutionality of a statute imposing term limits would be challenged, and yes, would likely find its way up to this very Supreme Court. However, a case would likely start in district court and advance to circuit court before reaching the high court. Yeah. There would be full briefing, a factual record, and decisions by lower courts. If, after all that, the Supreme Court nixed a widely popular term limits law, the public outrage and academic criticism would be intense. Indeed, the appetite for expanding the court might grow. I don't see how he gets there without they just declare it unconstitutional on its face. Anyway, despite this dreary and depressing state of affairs, White House remains undaunted. We're still finding out the facts, he told me, regarding the latest ethics scandal. He said he's confident that as the full story is brought before the public, the impetus on the court to act the impetus to act on court reform, at least among Democrats, will intensify. In the meantime, the best argument for court reform comes from Alito, whose arrogant, slipshod, and unconvincing defense makes him the poster boy for serious court reform. How interesting. Did I not put this aside? I feel like there has to have been something. I know I saw this earlier today, and I guess I must have seen it and decided, I think I might have made the decision not to pocket it because I just didn't think I was going to get here. But now I am here, and I have to deal with this. So there was some news. Let me go to the news section here and try and find it. Somebody was reporting about the papers of John Paul Stevens, now available at the I guess at the Library of Congress is where he parked them. But yeah, here we are. The Washington Post had this story earlier today. Might as well bring it up now, or at least bring up the subject, even if we don't thumb all the way through it. Let's see. Toby, Raji, Theodoric Meyer, and Leanne Caldwell on the byline for this piece from this morning. Yes. Documents reveal justices' long-running tensions over ethics. Just thought I would now bring you up to speed on what's going on here. This section of this political roundup for the morning, the early 202, begins with this piece from the courts. Documents reveal justices' long-running tensions over ethics. This could be a big week for the Supreme Court. The justices are expected to hand down decisions beginning Tuesday, but I guess beginning today, in fact, on the remaining cases they heard this term, including whether colleges and universities can continue to use affirmative action, admissions decisions, and whether Biden's student loan forgiveness program is lawful. It comes as justices face intense scrutiny over their rulings and the ethics controversies surrounding them, which have led to intensifying calls for binding ethics rules. This isn't the first time that Justices Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas have faced pressure to recuse themselves from cases over the activities of their relatives, their relationships with involved parties, or their financial interests. Newly released and previously unreported court documents that belonged to Justice John Paul Stevens, who led the Marble Palace's liberal wing, show just how aware the justices were of charges that the appearance of impropriety could shake the public's faith in the institution. They also show just how quick they were to push back against these concerns. The Library of Congress opened the papers to the public on May 2nd. The issues the justices wrestled with back then echo the controversies engulfing the court today. Although the court often puts up a united front in public, the documents provide a rare glimpse into its inner workings and show that at least one justice, Stevens, found Chief Justice William Rehnquist's rationale for not recusing himself from a major case to be insufficient. Let's go to the archives. In 1998, the Justice Department and 20 state attorneys general filed a major antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft, accusing the software giant of wielding a monopoly over the personal computer business. When the case reached the Supreme Court, Rehnquist faced a conundrum. His son, James C. Rehnquist, was a partner at a law firm and was working on private antitrust cases for Microsoft, as Chief Justice Rehnquist later publicly wrote. The question was whether Rehnquist should recuse himself An important decision because justices who recuse themselves from cases cannot be replaced, raising the risk of a 4-4 deadlock. Or if you, let's say, don't confirm a Supreme Court nominee for a year, you could raise the risk of a 4-4 deadlock. And whatever. Apparently that's a bad thing. Who knew? 7 Supreme Court justices, including Rehnquist, had previously signed a 1993 statement outlining their recusal policy for cases in which a law firm representing one of the parties before the court also employed one of the justices' relatives. The justices wrote that they would not recuse themselves from these types of cases unless the relative was lead counsel or the relative's compensation would be substantially, quote-unquote, substantially affected by the outcome. All right, already you can see problems. Rehnquist ultimately decided that he would not disqualify himself from the case and explained his decision in a draft statement that he sent to the other justices. Rehnquist suggested to the other justices that he was acutely aware of the weight of impartiality on the public consciousness and that the court wasn't operating in a vacuum. And I guess what he wrote here was, all of the usual kibitzers will be watching this case like a hawk, and I think full disclosure in advance may avoid some of the inevitable criticism. Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor responded, praising the Chief's decision. Ginsburg, of course, died in 2020. O'Connor, now 93, withdrew from public life in 2018. Stevens, on the other hand, had concerns with Rehnquist's reasoning. The justice, a former antitrust lawyer himself, thought that if the Supreme Court did something substantive in this case, it could and very likely would have an impact on a private antitrust litigation that Rehnquist's son was involved in. A former Stevens clerk told us, speaking on condition of anonymity to discuss internal court matters, Stevens underlined an argument by Rehnquist that said it would be unreasonable and speculative to conclude that the outcome of the Microsoft case would have an impact on his son's interests. Stevens wrote, "Wrong!" all caps, in the margin next to the underlined text. Many of Stevens's notes throughout his papers are in capital letters, it says, and explained that the, quote, matters are intertwined. Rehnquist also wrote that the outcome of the case before the court could potentially affect Microsoft's exposure to antitrust liability and other litigation. Stevens circled could potentially and wrote will definitely affect and may control in the margin. Stevens also believed that the appearance of a conflict of interest between the Chief Justice and his son should have been enough for Rehnquist to recuse himself from the Microsoft case, the clerk said. Stevens wrote, appearance, and then 3 exclamation points on the front page of the draft. This is a no-brainer for him, the clerk explained, noting that Stevens had a very low bar for recusal. The Supreme Court ultimately declined to hear the case and sent it back to the appeals court. The 2 parties later settled. Now, what about Scalia? Does he enter into this? In 2004, weeks after the Supreme Court agreed to hear oral arguments about whether Vice President Dick Cheney should hand over documents related to his energy policy task force, Justice Antonin Scalia went duck hunting in Louisiana. Scalia was joined on the trip by about a dozen other hunters, including Cheney, who traveled on a Gulfstream jet with Scalia, and a businessman who hosted the hunt. Legal experts at the time said the trip raised the appearance of impropriety and cast doubt on whether Scalia could be impartial. On February 23, 2004, the Sierra Club, which had sued for access to the Energy Task Force's records, asked Scalia to recuse himself from the case. Scalia refused, wrote a 25-page rough draft of a statement explaining his rationale, which was longer and more critical than the final version, and sent it to Stevens for his feedback. The final version of the statement is slightly different from the draft sent to Stevens. A clause about recusals was removed. In the original draft, Scalia wrote that he will have no hesitation about recusing himself from cases in the future, but he didn't, and he did have hesitation. The word false was replaced with misleading. Scalia had written in the draft that descriptions of news outlets, including the Washington Post, of Wallace Carline, the host of the Louisiana hunting trip, as an executive in the oil industry were, quote, false. The final version says they were misleading. How so? I don't know. The draft referenced frequent invitations to fly with administration officials. Officials in the executive branch frequently invite members of Congress and the Supreme Court to join them on government planes, Scalia wrote in the draft. The final version said members of Congress and others are frequently invited to accompany executive branch officials on government planes where space is available. Not that that would matter with respect to non-government planes like private ones, which is what happened here. I don't know what he was thinking he was doing. It's unclear from the documents why Scalia made these changes or whether Stevens made any suggestions. Nearly 2 decades later, Alito would use these arguments or similar to them, the ones employed by Rehnquist and Scalia to defend his decision not to recuse himself in cases in which billionaire Paul Singer stood to benefit. If you were wondering where that rationale came from. He was also similarly defensive about the concerns raised by what Rehnquist referred to as the usual kibitzers. And this time, the kibitzing isn't likely to stop anytime soon. So there you go. This has been going on for a long time, decades, in fact. And no doubt, mining the Stevens papers for this sort of information and background will help to increase the pressure from among the people who care about such things and value logic anyway. All right, lots more that we didn't get to, of course, but we've got all week to try to get to them, and you have the luxury of being able to stay tuned for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which comes up next. Of course, Justice Putnam brings you his view of the news. Let's take a look at what he's got lined up for you. The January 6th probe heats up as witnesses reportedly get immunity deals. That should be exciting. U.S. honeybees back in the news. Their spokesperson, I guess, has spoken to the press. Honeybees just suffered their second deadliest year on record. Librarians, who definitely do speak, were trained to defend intellectual freedom and fight book bans at the American Library Association's annual conference in Chicago. And a union official testified that the safety of railroads has been compromised by job cuts and time constraints. By the way, did you see the news the other day that they got their paid time off and sick leave that was necessary that they were considering striking over, and the Biden White House blocked their strike but said they'd be working to get them those benefits after all, and I guess they finally have got them. So true to and good to his word on that.
To Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
How about an international news roundup? Greece's Conservative New Democracy Party won a landslide election victory for its second 4-year term, and Mexico began imposing a 50% tariff on white corn imports among a trade dispute with the United States and Canada. All that and more coming up next. We'll see you tomorrow.